Have you ever had a moment where you felt like you stuck out, like you didn't fit in, like you were an oddball? For me, that was 2007. I was on a trip to South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe with Horizon International to get an up-close look at their AIDS orphan ministry. And we had gone on a couple hours trip to ministry outside of Zimbabwe's capital of Harare to scout out some possible new ministry locations. Zimbabwe at the time was ruled by this cruel, oppressive dictator named Robert Mugabe. And outsiders were not welcome in his country. So you can imagine what it felt like for me and my 7 other white friends out in the middle of nowhere, Zimbabwe, when our cars were stopped by armed military patrols. I was in the back seat with 2 other white men. And you could tell that the soldier with the submachine gun draped across his chest was not impressed that white people were in the car. We stuck out. We didn't fit in. We were foreigners in a strange land. And the military patrols weren't too sure about us. Once we arrived at our destination, it was a small town in rural Zimbabwe, it felt like everyone was staring at us with that look like, you people don't belong here. We were the only white people within 100 miles. 8 of these people are not like the others. Our skin color was different. Our clothes were different. We talked different. We looked different. We stuck out. We didn't fit in. We were odd. No one likes to appear odd. If we're honest, it's just a lot easier to fit in, to act like and look like everyone else. I mean, come on, we learn that lesson really quickly in middle school, don't we? Now, I want you to imagine with me, though, what if the 8 of us, white people, that were in Zimbabwe decided, you know what? We're going to convince everyone here to become like us in every way that they can. We're going to convince them to start acting and talking and behaving just like we do. They'll dress like we do and eat the same foods that we eat and talk like we do and value the same things that we value. That would be a pretty huge challenge, wouldn't it? Maybe even a snowball's chance in a really hot place challenge, huh? But isn't that exactly what Jesus was trying to do when he entered our world? I mean, think about it. He was a foreigner and a stranger in our world. And he came to find people who would follow him and surrender their ways for his ways. His ways were upside down from ours. They were odd, like love your enemies. And if someone slaps you on the cheek, offer them the other cheek. Or pray for those that persecute you. Or the first will be last and the last will be first. And if anyone wants to be a leader, then they have to serve. Compared to how our world operates, that's all very odd. And the author Gary Moon said, Jesus came to earth looking for people willing to become odd for God. Being odd for God is how we live out our identity in Christ as the scattered church. And that's what Peter is driving at in our Bible passage for today, which is 1 Peter 2, verses 11 through 17. And for those of you that are unaware, we're working our way through a book of the Bible called 1 Peter. It's a letter written by Peter, one of Jesus' closest followers, to a group of Christians who are scattered, unable to be together, and they are going through some major suffering. And so we're reading through it, discovering what it means to be God's scattered church. And in the passage we're looking at today, Peter makes a shift from focusing on knowing Jesus and our identity to exploring how to live out our identity. We've been talking about how knowing Jesus forms our identity, and our identity shapes the way we live. And last week, Zach did such a great job of helping us see who we are in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, where it says, "But you are not like that. You are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. And as a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light." You know, as we draw close to Jesus, we discover our true identity. We are chosen people, We're royal priests. We're a holy people, God's own possession. And with that new identity, we also have a new purpose. It's showing others the goodness of God. And believe it or not, we do that best by being odd for God. In fact, the King James translation says that we are a peculiar people. Peculiar, that's kind of odd, isn't it? And this is great news. We can live out our identity and our purpose as the scattered church right where we're at. We don't need a building or a program to do this. And that's the way it's always been. The odd behavior of Jesus' followers is a powerful way to help others discover God and His goodness. Because here's the thing, normal doesn't point people to Jesus. Normal doesn't glorify God. Normal doesn't help people discover the goodness of God. Normal is living hurried, overwhelmed, exhausted lives. Normal is going deep into debt to live the American dream. Normal is doing whatever feels good. Normal is having throwaway marriages. Normal is demanding my rights. But normal doesn't point people to Jesus. Now, you may be wondering, if normal doesn't help people discover God and His goodness, what exactly do you mean by odd? I mean, I understand. I've been odd most of my life. I'm the kid that thought a fun summer activity was reading encyclopedias. I know, I'm odd. But I realize most people don't like being odd. But I think the way Peter describes odd throughout the rest of his letter is going to sound pretty compelling to you, maybe even attractive. He starts in verse 11 where he says, "Dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very souls." Notice even in Peter's instructions, here he's still reminding us of our identity. He's saying we're foreigners, we're different. And the first way of being odd is to hold back from worldly, or you could say sinful, desires. In the world that Peter lived in, and it's also true of our world in our day, most people tended to believe that you should do whatever made you feel good. And the more of it, the better. So enjoy all the food and drink and sex that you want. Now, I want you to hear me loud and clear. Peter is not saying, and neither am I, that there's anything wrong with desire, including desire for food or drink or sex. But he is saying there's a proper way to fulfill those desires. When we let them run out of control, we know that all kinds of ugly, dehumanizing things begin to happen, whether it's addiction or abuse or worse, slavery. And if we allow our desires to run loose, they will make war on our souls and destroy us. Plus, if we do that, well, honestly, then we're just normal, because there's a whole lot of people that live that way. Peter says proper or honorable behavior is the odd way to live. And once again, points people to God and His goodness. Listen to what he says in 1 Peter 2, verse 12. He says, "Be careful to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. Then even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior, and they will give honor to God when He judges the world." Honorable is odd, isn't it? In a world that is filled with dishonesty, disrespect, bullying, racism, violence, sexual assault, and so much more, honorable is not normal. It's why when somebody behaves honorably, people kind of make a big deal about it. We've seen this over and over again during our COVID-19 quarantine. People organizing parades for nursing homes because those folks are hurting, or people finding ways to express their appreciation to frontline workers with free meals, acts of generosity. The list could go on and on and on. But we've made a big deal out of these honorable acts. And why? Why do we do that? Well, one reason is because it's good and beautiful, and there's something inside of us that says it's the right way. But it's also because honorable behavior is not normal. It's odd. We see it and we say, you know what? You don't see that every day, but man, is it nice to see. And Peter says when people see this kind of behavior, it's a way to point them to God and His goodness. Peter continues with our odd behavior then in verses 13 through 17. In verses 13 through 14, he says, "For the Lord's sake, submit to all human authority, whether the king is head of state or the officials he has appointed. For the king has sent them to punish those who do wrong and to honor those who do right." Peter says, submit to human authority. Now, in his day, that meant submitting to these horrible tyrants. There was a reason that the scattered church Peter was writing to was suffering. Around AD 64, when Nero was the Roman emperor, the city of Rome burned. And it burned furiously for 72 hours. And then the flames began to subside. But just when everyone thought that the city was saved, the fire started again and burned for 3 more days, destroying the homes of tens of thousands of people. Rumors swirled that the soldiers of Nero had actually stopped the firefighters from putting out the fires. And then it was rumored the soldiers had actually set the fires. And these rumors, they created serious political trouble for Nero. And say, in order to save his political neck, Nero blamed the Christians for the fire. People were already skeptical of them because of some of their practices. There were rumors about communion that made them cannibals because they ate the body and drank the blood of their leader. And there were rumors that they were against family values because they said love and loyalty to their leader, Jesus, was greater than to family. Nero saw an easy target, and so he blamed Christians for the fire. And once he did that, the persecution of Christians began. Nero had them gathered up. Some of them were crucified. Others were dipped in tar and hung on poles and then lit on fire to light up Nero's gardens throughout the night. And those are just a couple of the ways that they were persecuted. This is the emperor that Peter told his followers to submit to. Now, I want to be careful and say that doesn't mean that we always just lay down and accept obviously corrupt and horrible behavior from leaders. But submitting to our authority, submitting to our leaders is part of God's will. That we acknowledge their authority in our lives. It's human nature to cry out for revolution. He's horrible. Let's overthrow him and his corrupt government. That's normal. What isn't normal, what's odd, is for people to live peaceful, wise lives that acknowledge the authority of the government, and if it's corrupt, work for ways to change it in honorable ways. Peter also says this in verse 17. He says to respect the king. Everyone. Respect everyone and love the family of believers. Fear God and respect the king. Now, obviously, we don't have a king. We have a president and governors and mayors and other government officials. But I wonder, is our behavior, what we say about our elected officials and what we tweet about them and post about them on Facebook, is it honorable and respectful? And please hear me, there's a way to disagree that is respectful and honorable. But most of what I see, it isn't respectful or honorable. Let's be honest, what's become normal in our nation is disrespectful and dishonorable behavior towards those on the other side, those that we disrespect or that we disagree with, those in authority above us that we disagree with. There is ugly, spiteful speech that is the norm when it comes to politics in our nation. What's odd is respectful, honorable, civil disagreements. It's easy to respect the president or governor or mayor that we voted for. But what about the president or governor or mayor that we didn't vote for? Can we submit to and respect and show honor to the president that we didn't vote for and we dislike? Now, I understand this isn't easy. I have as strong opinions about politics and our leaders as anyone. But can I suggest a practice to help you with this? Pray for those in authority over us. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 through 3 says this: I urge you, first of all, to pray for all people. Ask God to help them and intercede on their behalf and give thanks for them. Pray this way for kings and all who are in authority so that we can live peaceful and quiet lives, marked by godliness and dignity. This is good and pleases God, our Savior. So he says, pray for everybody, all people. Ask God to help them, intercede on their behalf, give thanks for them. And then he says, pray this way for kings, for our leaders. And so I want to encourage you to pray that way for our president, for our governor, for our mayor. Pray that way for all of them, regardless of whether you voted for them or whether you agree with them or not. And can I also just suggest what my mom and my grandma always used to say? If you can't tweet or post or say anything nice, just don't say anything at all. But Peter doesn't want us to just respect our authorities. In fact, did you notice that he says respect everyone there in verse 17? Disrespect in our culture is normal. Respecting others, that's odd. And it's good and beautiful, and it helps people discover God and his goodness. The odd behavior of Jesus' followers is a powerful way to help others discover God and his goodness. And so what if we, God's people, his scattered church, were known as the most respectful people around? Because disrespect is so normal in our culture. The oddity of showing respect to everyone, regardless of who they are, what they've done, or what they look like, is a powerful statement to God's goodness. I'm convinced that more and more people would be interested in who our good God is if we showed respect for everyone, if God's church made it a point to show respect for everyone. Can we, the church, stand up and say everyone is worthy of respect? One way I would encourage you to do this is in the area of racial reconciliation. I think we're all aware of the recent killings of black men and women. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. And we are seeing, as we see these killings, the horrific sin of racism, of treating other people with disrespect, and even worse, that their lives are not as valuable as others because of their skin color. As white people in America, I think it's really fair to say we just don't understand the difficulties and horrors that black people have to deal with. I got a teeny tiny hint of it, of what they have to deal with when I was in Zimbabwe. But again, my experience was minuscule compared to what black people deal with here in America. I've never in all my life worried about what will happen to me when I go for a run. I went for 3 runs this week, and never once did I think that I might be in harm's way. But black men and women do all the time. And so here's what I want to ask you when it comes to showing respect for everyone, and especially in this area of racial reconciliation. I would encourage you to grow in your respect for minorities in America by learning about what they've been through, to actually take the time to see what it's like to be them. And if you need help, email me, call me, text me, and I will help you navigate that and find some resources to help you learn. I've been on this journey myself for the last 2 or 3 years, and I still have a lot to learn. But what I do know is that our world would be transformed if Christians led the way in addressing the issue of racism and racial reconciliation by saying everyone is worthy of respect, and then actually living it out. If we did that, we would be odd for God. And we would see an incredible wave of people turning to him. See, that's what was happening when Peter wrote this letter around 68 AD. In fact, Rodney Stark, a professor at the University of Washington and a historian, explains in his book, The Rise of Christianity, that in AD 40, there were about 1,000 Christians in the Roman Empire. So that would be 17 1,000th of 1% of the population. So virtually nobody. But by being odd for God, their numbers increased. In fact, they increased enormously. And so just 160 years later, in the year AD 200, Stark said that there were approximately 218,000 Christians in the Roman Empire. From 1,000 to 218,000 in 16 decades. That was great progress. Christians then represented 36 100ths of 1% of the population of the empire. Now, here's the amazing thing. In just another 150 years, here's what odd for God living did. By the year AD 350, there were 33.9 million Christians in the Roman Empire, representing 56.5% of the population. Friends, this is why odd for God living is so important. It literally changes the world. It literally helps our world look more like God intended it to look. It's why knowing Jesus and allowing Him to form our identity and shape the way we live is so important. Can we be odd for God and see how the world changes? Would you join me in doing that? We can do this because we are God's chosen people. We are His royal priests, God's very own possession, His peculiar people. Well, as Heather leads us in a song, I want you to allow your soul to get quiet and listen closely to what God's Holy Spirit is whispering to you today, right now, about being odd for Him. Would you get quiet and consider, what is it that God is inviting me to do today? How is God present and at work in me, inviting me to be odd for Him? How is He inviting me to join Him in what He's doing in our world? And most importantly, what are we going to do about it? Then we'll come back and share in communion.